Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Sunday, June 26, 2022. Welcome aboard this evening. If you'd like additional weather information, you can always go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence on the web, and you can go to a map where it shows the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. And it's interactive. When you click on the map, it'll bring up the Weather Service forecast office that services that part of the country. And from there, you can get forecast, watch, warning, advisory information, and all sorts of other type of climate data, including satellite radar imagery and some past weather information. So a very useful thing. Plus, you can check up on family and friends for anywhere in the nation. Well, in our headlines, early week record heat is possible in parts of the Panhandle. Already this warm-up is ongoing. Things are really heating up this afternoon in portions of the Panhandle, and it's going to be even hotter, especially Monday and Tuesday afternoons, and some of that heat could even linger into Wednesday. That's going to result in river rises there from high elevation snowmelt with those hot temperatures in parts of the Panhandle. So be aware of that, especially if outdoor recreating near any streams. There may be some higher levels and much swifter flows. Keep kids and pets away from there. As we go toward the interior, lingering smoke, poor air quality will continue to be a problem across the central and northeast interior, especially north of the Alaska Range. And areas of south central Alaska that have dealt with some smoke and haze, the winds are shifting around a bit now, so that air quality will be improving not only this day but also into Monday. Continued warm weather, though, can be expected across the eastern half of the state this coming week. Really, the extended forecast I'll be showing you toward the end of the show supports that, and drier conditions for the east and southeast parts of the state, and a little cooler, a little wetter there toward the west. Well, here's the proof in the pudding. You can go and look at the FAA webcams there in the central interior. Anana, smoky haze, 74 degrees. They would likely be, that was at 2 o'clock. Now, if you were to factor in, if that were sunny skies, no smoke and haze, temperatures would be rising into the 80s there. But that smoke is putting a lid on maximum temperatures. Meanwhile, in through the Panhandle, bright blue sky there across the inner channels. There is a marine layer near the outer coast, but areas that are seeing full sun are rising through the 70s, and some places will reach even the 80s as early as today. And as I mentioned, there will be a few records set early this coming week across parts of the Panhandle, where temperatures very well will get into the 80s, with maybe even an isolated 90-degree reading or two possible. As far as fire weather goes, the update on weather: smoke will continue to be thick at times in central, northeast interior, but improving air quality south central. Gusty southerly winds in the west and southwest part of the state enhance fire behavior, but the cloud cover and higher humidities have kind of dampened the threat, but nevertheless the breeze is not wanted. And many incident teams are deployed to the field and are actively managing fires right now based on these values at risk and available resources that they have to fight a fire with. So that's something else to keep in mind. High pressure will keep us very warm and dry over the eastern half of the state the rest of this week. And we'll show the fire dangers here. You can see especially north of the Alaska Range, the central and eastern interior, especially up there through the Yukon Flats. Very high to extreme fire danger. Also, fire dangers starting to get a bit higher there in the drier conditions that have emerged in portions of the far north Panhandle, as well as the southern Panhandle. So with the warm and dry weather anticipated this week, that'll bump up the fire danger there in the southeast. And across the state with satellite imagery, we have that occluded front now pushing across the Alaska Peninsula, entering the southwest coast, bringing some light showers, cloud cover, sprinkles there to Bethel down toward Dillingham. And areas further east beneath the dome of high pressure in the Gulf, we're seeing clearer skies, and we're also seeing much warmer temperatures. Now up there, again, around Fairbanks and the Yukon River, smoke and haze has been the rule. and will continue to be so as we go through the next several days with no real big change in the overall pattern. There's the high pressure this afternoon, 1030 high centered there down over the lower Gulf. Weak thermal trough of low pressure extending from British Columbia up to around the Alcan border, and then occluded front working its way into the southwest coast. Now that occluded front is going to just kind of wash out, can't advance east because that big warm ridge of high pressure that is centered over the Gulf extends northward up into south central parts of the state, so that kind of acts as a blocker, and so we're not going to see moisture or cooler temperatures work eastward by any means. There's another low located just southwest there of the western half of the Aleutians. That'll be moving into the central western Aleutians by Monday morning and afternoon. High pressure remains anchored over the lower Gulf, North Pacific, with another ridge kind of nudging northwestward back into southwest parts of the state. And then on Tuesday, we'll see a weak thermal trough there along areas of the Panhandle, with another trough up there in the northwest Canada. Along this boundary, parts of southwest Yukon Territory and some of the intercoastal mountains there of the Panhandle and back toward the eastern Alaska Range could see some scattered showers and isolated storms developing with the daytime heating. Temperatures lows for Monday morning will generally be in the mid 40s to lower 50s, both in the Panhandle and across South Central. Temperatures on Monday afternoon going for 85 there at Ketchikan, Metlakatla, on up to areas like Skagway as well. And it could hit 80 at Glen Allen, still with some persistent cloud cover, early day cloud cover there. It could be only about 65 at Anchorage, and then again lows generally 50s there in the Panhandle. Very warm Monday night into Tuesday morning, and then temperatures again, especially northern Panhandle, will be on the hot side. Might be slightly cooler there in the southern part of the Panhandle, back into the 70s mainly, but still very warm. And then back up through areas along and south of the Alaska Range and South Central, we are looking at temperatures getting back up into the 70s and still a few isolated 80-degree readings. Warmest temperatures in the north there along the Yukon River in the 50s. Even along the Arctic coast, we have Dead Horse there at 54 with a high there of 70 for Monday. Should reach at least lower 80s, Fairbanks, Fort Yukon, Northway, Tok. Those areas will be the warm location. On the west coast, 48 there. On St. Lawrence Island, 44, Wales 50 at Nome, so it's not going to be as warm, just given the surrounded by the cooler waters there of the Bering and Bering Strait. And then Tuesday morning lows similarly generally near or just above 50, especially there through Yukon Flats. Air temperatures maybe a few degrees cooler come Tuesday afternoon there, 80 degrees forecast for Fort Yukon. But temperatures back to the west, generally 40s to near 50 degrees. Bering Strait on up toward the northwest coast. And coming on down through the southwest, Bethel and Anvik having a low around 50 degrees, as well as Dillingham and King Salmon. And then temperatures tomorrow afternoon beneath the cloud cover, a few light showers, generally in the 50s to maybe lower 60s, cooler as you extend westward out through the Aleutians. Tuesday morning, lows again near 50 at Dillingham on up through Aniak and Bethel, and then temperatures generally 60s. There may be a few 70-degree readings just on the west side of the Alaska Range around McGrath on down toward Lake Iliamna. And then here's the extended temperature forecast provided by the Climate Prediction Center of the Weather Service. July 2nd through the 6th. This is centered on the 4th of July. And look at a continuation above normal temperatures over the southeast interior along the northern Gulf Coast into the Panhandle. So that would mean more of the same, maybe not quite as hot as what we're going to see here in the Panhandle for Monday and Tuesday, but the trend continues. Temperatures will be near normal there on the west side of the state, so not quite as warm. And as far as any moisture to relieve any fire danger threat, not a whole lot. It should precipitation is expected to average below normal across the Panhandle, and then near normal along the southeast and Alcan border, and then much of the interior and back through the west and northwest. Precipitation should average near to maybe slightly above normal for this time of year.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's time now for aviation weather. And if you have a flight planned early in the week, Monday or Tuesday, we continue to have an area of high pressure located over the Gulf. It extends into the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere up into southeast interior portions of the state, and it's heavily influencing the mini heat wave that's going to be ongoing Monday and Tuesday there across the Panhandle inner channels, where temperatures are going to be well into the 80s, could even be an isolated 90-degree reading or two. Even some isolated storms popping up with the daytime heating further west. Plenty of IFR conditions out over water areas from the far north down through the Bering Strait and across much of the Bering Sea and the Aleutian Chain and the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. Yes, come Monday afternoon, we are looking for temperatures to be very warm across the southeast panhandle and extending up into east central areas where there could be a few thunderstorms pop up with the daytime heating. We continue to see IFR conditions out over areas of at least the open waters of the Gulf and then back through the Bering. There is a weak trough or weakening frontal system that's pushed into the southwest coastal areas, and with it there may be a few light showers. Another low will be working its way up into and through the central Aleutians as we go through the day on Tuesday. IFR conditions continue out over the Gulf beneath that big warm dome or ridge of high pressure. Much of the interior mainland and Yukon Valley will see VFR conditions Tuesday morning, and for Tuesday afternoon, again, temperatures are going to be very warm across the inner channels there of the Panhandle. Can't rule out an isolated thunderstorm popping up there in those inner coastal mountains. And as far as back through the western Bering, plenty of IFR conditions, though much of the mainland should be VFR. And for Adigan Pass as well as Anatuvik Pass, we're looking at VFR conditions on Monday. Further south and west, there could be a little MVFR conditions on the east entrances, especially of Lake Clark Pass. Otherwise, VFR conditions will rule for the day, and further rounding up through the central Alaska Range, Rainy Pass as well as Windy Pass should see VFR conditions extending into Isabel, though further east there is going to be a little bit of moisture that could create a chance of at least an isolated storm in vicinity of either Isabel Pass or Mentasta Pass on Monday afternoon and evening. And Tanita Pass further south and west there, closer toward the Gulf, VFR conditions. And right now it's looking like Portage Pass should be able to remain VFR throughout the day on Monday. Further east, Chilkoot and White could see VFR conditions hold, but IFR, there could be a few isolated storms try to develop with the daytime heating in the surrounding mountains. And looking at the freezing levels, they are rather high, coming upwards to 12,000 feet there south end of Haida Gwaii into British Columbia. And generally, we're looking at freezing levels up around 11,000 feet over much of the Panhandle, as surface air temperatures will be in the 80s to near 90 Monday afternoon and again Tuesday afternoon. Further west, coolest temperatures out over the Bering. We see freezing levels that get down to and a bit below 6,000 feet. And icing potential is going to be greatest beneath a couple low-pressure systems there. 10,000 to 15,000 feet there up through the northern Bering, lower Chukchi, and then another low it'll be pushing into the western central Aleutians. We may find some icing between 12,000 feet and a flight level of 20,000 feet. Jet stream level winds are light across the Gulf. That's 30,000 feet. We have the upper level high centered up there along the Alcan border. It actually does, the ridging extends down in the northern Gulf. The low out there north of the western half of the Aleutians and the lower Bering, coming down to 9,000 feet. You see that high pressure along the northern Gulf coast with high pressure at the surface out over the central, I should say, lower Gulf, and then back to the west, low pressure there north of the western and central Aleutians with a belt of winds to 45 knots. We also have some winds out there along the west and northwest coast, and as we come down to 3,000 feet, winds will be southwesterly along the northwest coast, Point Lay, and up toward west of Utqiagvik, upwards to 45 knots, and then an area of 40 to 45 knot winds there, cutting across the central Aleutians out of the southwest. And that's going to translate to the potential for some considerable moderate turbulence across the west side of the state, particularly western half of the Brooks Range, Seward Peninsula towards St. Lawrence, and then down just west of the Alaska Range from the middle Yukon Valley toward Bristol Bay, surface to 5,000 feet turbulence possible. And then going back toward the west, surface to 4,000 feet there across the central Aleutians. So that wraps up the aviation weather. If you do have a flight plan, be sure to check the latest conditions and forecast before heading out. And if you get airborne, have a safe flight.
So that Galena flood back in 2013 was at the intersection of weather and climate. Rick, I often get questions about the difference between weather and climate. How do you distinguish between the two?
Well, that's a really good question, John. One of the analogies that I like to use, the wardrobe analogy. So in my closet, in my dresser, I've got clothes appropriate for 90-degree weather and 50 below weather. That's the climate part of my wardrobe. Well, what I'm going to put on today, am I going to wear my Hawaiian shirt because it's going to be a hot July day, or am I going to wear my bunny boots because it's going to be 50 below? That's the weather part of my wardrobe.
You know, there's another interesting analogy. I've heard it said that climate is like your personality, whereas weather is like the mood you're in today. It's like that old John Denver song. Some days are diamonds and some days are stones. That's how weather works.
Of course, it's really a continuous range. Just as the Galena ice jam flooding was the result of a weather event, that ice jam, up against that cold spring, a climate event. So too with less impactful events. For instance, a daily record high temperature is a weather event, one day's high. But we put that in a climate context, say comparing to a century or more of individual temperatures on a given date.
So these extreme events like record high temperatures also happen on the seasonal time scale. Just in the last few years, we've had what was called a marine heat wave in the waters south of Alaska, the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. But the water temperatures in that area set new records in 2015 and 2016.
And most Alaskans are acutely aware that big wildfire seasons are becoming more and more common, most recently in 2015. And the frequency of million-acre seasons has doubled since the early 1990s.
Just this past winter, we had another event in the Bering Sea. The ice extent in the Bering was lower than it had ever been in the last 150 years. That's about as far back as the good records go. There'd never been another year like this one in the Bering with so little sea ice. That had major impacts on the communities along the west coast and the northwest coast.
So, John, what have you been hearing from folks around town about these kind of climate extremes?
I've heard from a number of people who've been here a long time that winters just aren't what they used to be. The average temperatures are higher than they were back in the 1960s and 1970s, and we just don't get the extreme cold days, the days down in the minus 50s or even the minus 60s that we used to experience in Fairbanks back in the 1960s, 1970s, and even into the 1980s.
Well, and it's not just winter either. 2016 and 2017, the summers brought unusually muggy, humid weather to Fairbanks. We're not used to thinking of that in interior Alaska, but record high humidities during the summer months. As in the winter, we've had a significant increase in freezing rain events, since about 2000. So much so that DOT has changed their road treatment strategy, and now we have the school district building in winter rain days into the calendar. And of course, we all need good weather forecasts for these high impact weather events.
We know, though, that weather forecasts are sometimes wrong just 3 or 4 days in advance. So if these weather forecasts and the models they're based on can't pick up events like freezing rain 3 or 4 days ahead, how can we believe what they say about climate for the future?
Well, that's a really good question, John. And I think the important thing to remember is that parts of the system are predictable.
So climate models can't give you weather for particular days or even for particular months or years. They actually predict averages. These are averages over periods of a decade or two, or even averages over periods of several years. So they don't give us the month-to-month information that we might want. What are they telling us about the future, though?
Well, these climate models are telling us on the decades-long time frames that warmer winters are going to become more common. We're going to have more frequent, very low sea ice years with late freeze up and early meltout. And the same will be true on Alaskan rivers. We'll have more frequent seasons when freeze up is late and break up is early.
One of the other common threads in these climate model predictions is that heavy rain events and heavy snow events will become more common in the future. That's actually a prediction that the models make for mid-latitudes as well as for high latitudes in areas like Alaska. So we can expect the heavy downpours to become heavier and the heavy winter snows to become heavier than we've been used to. They're also predicting more frequent freezing rain events, getting back to what you talked about earlier. These events that might have happened just once every year or two in the past could actually end up happening several times in a winter in the future, according to the climate models.
And it is important to remember that even in a warming world, there are still going to be seasons and years that are colder than the average, but these cold seasons will become less and less common. So, John, maybe I don't need to have those bunny boots in my closet anymore?
Well, at least you won't need to wear them as often as you did in the past.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and let's look at the sea ice edge as we begin our marine weather segment. A lot of open water there in through the lower Chukchi Sea. Still some lingering ice in parts of Kotzebue Sound and up along the northwest coast from Kivalina on up through Wainwright. As we go along the Arctic coast, the ice there, the shorefast ice is going to begin to pull away, so we expect that to break up further. Keep that in mind. Otherwise, the melting will continue now that we are plowing through summer. And looking across the panhandle, the heat there, record high temperatures possible, the inner channels Monday afternoon and again on Tuesday. Winds will be out of the north-northwest, Petersburg down toward Ketchikan and Metlakatla, 10 to 15 knots, waves a couple few feet. Look for southeasterly winds going up Lynn Canal with 3-foot waves, and then the outer coast 20 to 25 knot winds and waves running 5-6 feet. On Tuesday, winds will be out of the north-northwest through the inner channels with winds about 10 to 15 knots and waves 2 to 3 feet. Along the outer coast, look for northwest to north winds 25 to as high as 30 knots as you get down toward Craig, where waves south of Sitka and off of Craig could be as high as 10 to 11 feet. Across the northwestern Gulf, look for southwest winds off the Kenai to 20 knots, westerly winds south of Cordova, and Prince William Sound, southwest winds 15 knots, waves a couple of feet. We're looking at 15 knot winds across much of Cook Inlet. There'll be more southwesterly there coming up toward Anchorage, and then toward the south we are looking at easterly winds at the entrance at 15 knots. On Tuesday, across a broad portion of the region, we expect generally southwest winds 15 to 20 knots within Cook Inlet, and as high as 25 knots off the Kenai Peninsula and northeast there of Kodiak. And Kodiak Island and the peninsula for Monday, variable wind, Shelikof Strait 15 knots. Winds will be between 10 and 15 knots, generally onshore off the Pacific. On the Pacific side, 10 to 15 knots with waves 4 to 5 feet. And southeasterly winds on the Bering side with waves running a couple feet from Cold Bay all the way up there to the Bristol Bay. And on Tuesday, winds in the vicinity of Kodiak Island will be from the south-southwest around 20 knots, waves running 5-6 feet. And then generally variable winds around 10 knots either side of the peninsula on the Bering or Pacific side, with waves of 2 feet or so on the Bering side and 3 to 4 feet on the Pacific side. Across the Aleutian chain, the central and eastern Aleutians will see winds picking up to 25 to 30 knots from Nikolsky on over toward Atka and Adak, and with the low pressure that's kind of working its way up there between Adak and Kiska. And by Tuesday, you see that low north of Kiska, the circulation, and winds should generally be out of the south-southwest, or at least have a southerly component through the central and eastern Aleutians. Winds 25 to near 30 knots, waves 8 to 10 feet on the North Pacific side, 6 to 10 feet on the Bering side. And winds on Monday for the southwest coast in areas including St. Matthew, down through St. Paul and St. George, southeasterly 15 to 20 knot winds, waves 4 to 5 feet, and then generally south winds along the southwest coast up into Norton Sound at 15 to 20 knots, waves running 3 to 4 feet, and generally either a southeast or south flow on Tuesday, 20 to 25 knot winds, St. Matthew down towards St. Paul, waves there 7 to 8 feet, falling off to a couple of feet within Norton Sound with winds from the south at 10 knots. And then along the Bering Strait, lower Chukchi Sea winds pick up 25 to 30 knots there off of Point Hope on up through Point Lay. And we expect waves in the open waters there of the lower Chukchi Sea 6 to 7 feet. Ice still in place with 15 knot winds or so from the south along the northern Arctic coast. And on Tuesday, those winds along the Arctic coast continuing generally from a southwesterly direction at 10 to 15 knots. But increasing upwards to 25 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea before passing through the Bering Strait, and waves in the lower Chukchi Sea running right around 4 to 5 feet. And a quick look at Monday's surface weather map. At high pressure, the warm ridge of high pressure is anchored over the lower Gulf and North Pacific, with its influence really being felt there in through the Panhandle, where some record high temperatures will be possible Monday and Tuesday afternoons. Still smoke across the interior, especially along the middle and upper Yukon River Valley, and then low pressure back out there toward the western and central Aleutians. By Tuesday, that low continues to lift up into the Bering with a warm trough there lingering across areas of the northeastern and Panhandle coast. Well, that does it for the show this Sunday evening. Thank you for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.